My name is Kim Mutcherson. I am the Co-Dean of Rutgers Law School in Camden, and this is The Power of Attorney. Today we have something very special for you. We have somebody who is not Rutgers affiliated, which is unusual for us for this podcast. We are absolutely thrilled that Judy Perry Martinez, who is the current president of the American Bar Association, has taken the time to talk with us today. It's absolutely thrilling. So welcome to our podcast, Judy.
Well, good morning, Kim. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. So, I want to try to get to a lot of different topics in our conversation today. So, just going to go ahead and jump in. And one of the things that I always like to do when I meet someone who's an attorney, particularly someone like you who has had such a distinguished career in the law, can you tell me what's your origin story? Why is it that you decided that law is how you wanted to spend your life?
Kim, I was born and raised in New Orleans, where I am today, and came from a family that really certainly didn't know any lawyers.
Hmm.
I had a brother who had started law school while I was in undergraduate at the University of New Orleans, taking a business undergraduate curriculum. And I had a professor who asked me to stay one day after class, and I did. And he said to me, "You need to go to law school."
Hmm.
And as a consequence, I was not one of those who had thought earlier about that in any serious way. I wasn't a 6 or 8-year-old who had always dreamed of being a lawyer. And I love those stories when people have those as their stories of origin, but mine was a bit of a different path. And this one individual seeing something that he thought should be brought out in order for somebody to pursue, found out that it was exactly what I wanted to do with my life.
That's terrific.
And
I love those kinds of stories. I was one of those, 10 years old, wanted to be a lawyer people, but I also think, your story is such a reflection of how pivotal one person can be in another person's life. And so it's so wonderful that your professor took the time to take you aside and say, here's a path that I think would make sense to you. That's a great way to get into the law, definitely. So you decided that you were going to go to law school. You were not from a family of lawyers. I imagine then that the transition to law school might have been a little anxiety producing. And you went to Tulane for law school, so you stayed close to home. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to be a law student as somebody who didn't sort of have those role models or have people with that experience?
that's a terrific way to get into what I think is often a hard transition, even for those who may have known role models who were lawyers, because it in part depends upon what you came from in terms of your undergraduate studies.
Hmm.
And I had actually started in special education at LSU. I transferred back home when my parents were having some challenges financially, but also because I was falling in love with my now husband, who was at Tulane in a different curriculum. And I came to University of New Orleans, which was in great part a commuter school, but allowed me to get a really solid education. And once there, I was in the undergraduate business program. So when I graduated and went straight on to Tulane and had worked during my undergraduate years while at University of New Orleans, I really didn't have a sense of what necessarily would be required of me in law school. And I think if I point to one aspect of that transition that I found challenging, it was that I was all of a sudden put in a position where I needed to be able to write a good essay and to approach law from the perspective of writing as a tool of the trade. And so that took me at least a semester or more. And so I urge those who find that first semester challenging to make sure that you give yourself a chance, that you believe in yourself, and know that you have this wherewithal inside of you to go forward and to pursue competency and excellence in law. And really, by the time I got to the end of my first year and had done well my first year, but you always want to strive to do even better, be at the top of your game, as you know. I think I had realized what I needed to do in order to write solid answers to those exam questions and to really approach the skills that were necessary for law school success as well as for career success later on.
Terrific. One of the things that I often say to students, I teach tort, so I have the fun of being able to teach students who are first year, first semester law students. And one of the things that I say to them is that part of what we're doing in law school in that first year is we're teaching you to think differently and to think critically in a particular way that's related to the law, but we're also sort of teaching you a new language. And I wonder if that was kind of your experience when you went into law school as well, that there's a way that lawyers talk and the way that lawyers think about words that is often very different from what we've been accustomed to before we come to law school.
I think you're right, Kim. I think that is certainly another tool of the trade, the languages and skill set there that we use. I also think there's a transition component that is important for people to acknowledge as they think about going to law school, and that is that you become a part of a community that possibly you have not been exposed to before. And that is a community where everyone there has top notch skills and they are now in an environment where they can either compete and be for themselves, or they can be a part of a community and be there for others. My experience at Tulane Law School was significantly the latter. And I can tell you that there are friends that I made on that very first day of walking into Tulane Law School that I am still friends with today. And in fact, in the last 2.5 weeks, I have seen two of them, one in New Orleans when she visited, and one in Philadelphia when I was on the road for the American Bar Association this past week. And I think that tells you something about how you can be a part of that community, but that you have to take your energy and your commitment and make sure that you're investing in order to be there for others as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd like to transition a little bit to post law school. A lot of people come into law school thinking, oh, I want to do X kind of law. Some of them will end up doing that kind of law. Many of them will not as they go through their law school career. How did you figure out what you ultimately wanted to do with your law degree?
Well, during law school, I participated in moot court and did other activities such as trial ad, and learned that I really wanted to be in the litigation space. And most importantly, as I did clerkships and explored the different paths in law, I looked for a firm that I thought would be best suited for me in terms of my journey for fulfillment in the law.
Hmm.
And I came upon a law firm, Simone Perigine Smith in Redfern, where I am today. That was a place that I thought was best to start my career. I ended up staying there for 21 years as a commercial litigator. I was a partner. I became a member of the management committee, at one point the most senior lawyer in the firm. And I stayed not only because of the broad breadth of what I had in terms of my portfolio of clients, but also because it was a place that early on in my career I realized cared about lawyer fulfillment and
Mm.
was supportive of pro bono work and of lawyer engagement in the organized bar, and really saw that those opportunities present a development opportunity for leaders in the firm.
Mhm.
And as a
Mhm.
consequence, because they were able to provide that support and foundation, I decided to spend over 2 decades there. And it was only when I got a call out of the blue, actually through a connection made in networking at the American Bar Association from a firm out of state, that I went into the aerospace and defense industry for a company that I had not done work with before. So
Wow.
again, the value of that organized bar engagement and working hard on things that for which you and others in the organized bar have commonality of purpose allowed me to find a path in the law that perhaps I would not have experienced had I not been engaged in the American Bar Association. And that led to yet another decade, 12 years, at Northrop Grumman in the aerospace and defense and cyber sector. And it was from that time or during that time that I learned so many further skills that have really been of benefit to my work in the years that followed.
That is great. So I want to pick that apart a little bit because there were so many pieces in there that I want to get more details about. One of the things that you talked about was, finding a place where one that you fit in, but also a place where it was the kind of supportive legal community in terms of the law firm that you needed, which I think is so critical. One of the things that we talk about in the legal profession a lot these days is wellness, is career fulfillment, is being able to find ways to balance your personal and professional life. Could you talk a little bit about, how your firm was organized in order to make it a place where you could be there for 20 years and feel like, you're having a fulfilling career, but you're also having a fulfilling life?
Well, it was a firm that had a good contingency of young professionals within its ranks. And as a consequence, we went through those journeys in life as young professionals where you're raising families and you're helping parents as they go on in age. But also importantly, they, I think, grew as a firm in terms of their sense of awareness of what they needed to do in order to support both individuals and the firm as a whole.
Hmm.
And from my perspective, that meant, and everybody has different journeys that they take, but from my perspective, that meant being able to do pro bono work. And I did capital habeas work while I was here for over a 9-year period with other partners. I had 4 children in 6 years, and some of those experiences required extended stays for health reasons where I could not be actively engaged in the practice because I was on had a medical challenge. All of those ended up with extraordinarily successful stories, but it was because of the firm's realization that when they accommodate and invest in individuals, they will see returns of loyalty. In my case, that meant 21 years, returns of productive work hours when the person is full front and center and available to work. And most importantly, individuals who are pursuing a professional career that care about, so importantly, not only the work to be done for clients, but that we also have this greater role as public citizens that we must fulfill.
Hmm.
And they understood that, and they, in fact, supported that. And as a consequence, I was able to do what was important to me.
That's terrific. Sounds like a wonderful place to work. I hope that all of our students, all of our graduates, find places like that where they can have fulfilling careers.
And I will say, if I may, you have to look for that. Number one.
Hmm. Hmm.
Number two, it's not always perfect. It never is in any employment setting where you go. So you have to raise the issues. You have to ask for what you think will assist. You have to expect that sometimes the answer will be no. But at the same time, you have to understand that if you want to be a part of an institution, a part of a community, one of the greatest contributions you can give is to share your views about how to make it better, whether it's from that perspective of accommodations for parents or wellness or otherwise. It is about sharing your views, raising your voice in a way that will help them get better each and every day.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we talk about a lot when people are thinking about getting a law degree is we say, there are lots of different opportunities, lots of different places that you can go. And one of the things that I think is great about being a lawyer is that people can move through different spaces. And so you were talking about, being at the firm, doing commercial litigation, and then getting an opportunity to move into what sounds like a totally different field, that sort of aerospace technology industry. Could you talk about that transition? One of the things that I think is really fun is whatever kind of law you're practicing often requires you to know some of the technical aspects of the particular field that you're working in. So I imagine that the switch that you made was potentially a really significant one for you.
It was, but it ended up being extraordinarily rewarding. And the first thing I think you have to do when you're in the midst of a transition like that, Kim, is to pause and realize that you're about to go on this wonderful journey of learning. And if you have that open mindset, I think you will fare better. You also have to be available to bring to that new setting what you've learned in your prior setting of employment.
Hmm.
So in my case, I went from commercial litigation at a law firm to managing litigation that other law firms were doing for my company.
Mm.
And that was a wonderful learning experience for me. But it also afforded the opportunity for me to share with them what I had learned from my days in practice. And then I had yet another transition while I was in house, and that was to move from litigation, which I knew well at that point in time and had managed so many firms in different parts of the country. I went to a job of chief compliance officer for the entire company in standing up that corporate compliance office, which meant an even greater reach across the globe and meant really bringing together a multitude of disciplines and people who were working from the business space as well as from the traditional law department practice, if you will, and bringing them together to understand how we could best serve the business of the company and making sure that compliance was at the top of the game, at the top of the list, that ethics was something that was integral to each and everything we did, and afforded lawyers in the company, as well as so many others who are a part of that compliance and ethics team, the ability to work more closely together.
Perfect. I want to ask you to expand a little bit on that just because I think a lot of times people hear the word compliance thrown around and they don't quite know what that person's job is, what their role is. Can you tell people what it means to be a chief compliance officer and why compliance is so critical within pretty much the whole range of industries out there?
Well, compliance is really a function that has become increasingly important across companies of all sizes, and not only Fortune 500 companies. It is the way by which companies assure that they have in place an integrated framework for not only compliance with rules and regulations, but also with company policies that may, in fact, impose even greater standards or higher standards on individuals. And it is about creating that framework. It is about educating employees across the company about that framework. And it is about testing that framework to make sure on a continuous basis that it is the strongest and best that it can be so that the company is operating well within any lanes that it needs to. Most importantly, it's about, at the heart and soul of it, ethics and integrity. It's about tone at the top and making sure that all leadership at every level in the country, whether you're talking in the company, excuse me, whether you're talking about the highest of leaders in the C suite to the line, four persons on a manufacturing line, understand what their individual obligations are to not only do their part with regard to complying with what has been set forth for them, but speaking up when they see something that they believe puts the company at risk or is not the way that the company wants its employees to behave with regard to ethics and integrity. And it is also about making sure that the company is able to communicate in a very effective way with its suppliers and vendors and others with which it has ongoing business relationships about the values of the company, its ethics, its integrity, and how it goes about pushing out compliance across the country, across the company.
So it's incredibly multi-layered and incredibly complicated and deeply central.
It is, and it's really about each and every employee understanding, first of all, and also owning their portion of what the compliance obligations are.
Right. I want to go back a little bit. You were talking about pro bono work and some of the pro bono work that you got to do, and I'd love to get more details about that. But first, I want to ask you, why, from your personal perspective and a professional perspective, why is pro bono work important?
Well, I see the importance of pro bono work each and every day from my year of service here as president of the American Bar Association. There is simply an unending stream of lawyers across the country and beyond who do work within the realm of the ABA's good programs, and those of state and local and affinity bars across this country who contribute pro bono hours in so many different ways. Some of it is direct services, some of it is for those in need, some of it is supporting and lending assistance to NGOs or nonprofit organizations who are in turn helping others. There are many lawyers who contribute to policy development and do other means of making sure that they are giving back. In my case, I would share that it was really during my first year at Tulane Law School when I went to a seminar in a classroom after school, one of those seminars that you walk into because you've seen a handwritten poster on the wall hanging in the hallway. And it was a panel on capital habeas work.
Mm,
And it was of several distinguished lawyers from my community in Louisiana who talked about the role they had played and continue to play in pro bono services for the individuals who were on my state's death row. And one of the individuals was a gentleman by the name of Sam Dalton, who's now passed. But I can remember listening particularly to Sam and having that moment of awakening about this is what lawyers do.
mm,
This is how lawyers make a difference. And frankly, from the time of my childhood, I had a example of how we each should contribute, not only through my parents and the work that they did on a regular basis for those in need, but also through my older brother, whom I mentioned earlier, who had done work for individuals with disabilities. But now I saw the intersection of law and that spirit of giving, that spirit of wanting to pay it forward. And from that time on, I understood that it was something that lawyers could do and make a difference in a different way than that professor had made a difference in my life
mm,
early on at University of New Orleans. So
wonderful.
it was something that I think helped shape me when we started in the late 80s, the New Orleans Pro Bono Project, a group of us who were involved in the New Orleans Bar Association. And that now is a thriving organization that connects lawyers to those in need for several decades now. Again, it was not unlike law school. It was when coming through the organized bar as a young lawyer, we came together as a community to share something that we thought was important and to make it happen. And then other work that I've seen lawyers in my community as well as across the country continues to prove again and again to demonstrate the importance of what lawyers can give back at in so many ways on so many levels.
Absolutely. The work that you were doing specifically was capital habeas work. And it feels like we're in this time when there's so much conversation about the death penalty. There's enormous conversation about exonerations and the ways in which our criminal justice system doesn't always, actually far too often, operates in really pernicious and dangerous ways, particularly for specific communities. So, one, can you talk about what it means to be a person who's doing pro bono work that's capital habeas work? Because not everybody's going to recognize what habeas means. And then, two, I know that you've also been on the board of the Innocence Project down there. If you could talk about that work and how that work is so important to how we think about our criminal justice system and the ways in which that system can and should be reformed.
When I look at the work of the American Bar Association in the capital habeas and capital representation space, what I see is deep expertise that is the result of the knowledge set that our professional staff has, as well as our volunteers who step up time and time again to make sure that individuals who are in the capital space who have been sentenced to die by lethal injection or otherwise have representation post conviction, which means after they've been sentenced and had their appeals run forth. And what I see in watching all these individuals is that they commit to take on these cases that requires a tremendous amount of work. Sometimes they can last, as in my case, a decade or more.
Mhm.
And what it requires is both stamina as well as commitment of not only lawyers, because lawyers are essential to that process, of course, and the ABA has its well cited standards for post conviction representation, but it's also about fortifying, when firms take on these cases, a team that often involves paralegals and administrative staff and investigators and others who are as essential to that work as the lawyers who may be leading the representation. I know in my case that was in fact what drove our team is the commitment across the board of so many in the law firm who helped in our case. But I also recognize that sometimes these cases, because they are so large and so long in length, can be something that people hesitate to take on. What I can share with you is that there are tremendous resources to assist with regard to knowledgeable individuals who sometimes are available to be co-counsel or to serve as a resource to assist with the representation that you may take on. And I can also tell you that the work we do in this space as the American Bar Association is critical to assuring that the constitutional guarantees that are afforded to every individual who's facing the death penalty are in fact with them at each and every turn. And that requires so much, because what we know is that when they are not afforded, when due process is not afforded, when the standards for representation are not met, we oftentimes find ourselves with results where somebody, not only somebody who is innocent, which is what the Innocence Project work is about, although in New Orleans, the Innocence Project doesn't take on capital habeas cases, they take on all other cases. We
Mm.
have special units down here that do that. But it's also about the individual we should never forget that may, in fact, be guilty of a crime, but is no less deserving of representation under our American justice system. And sometimes that's forgotten. And sometimes people fail to understand the role of lawyers in that representation. There are, as you know, in the capital space, again, it is the determination that a jury makes of not only the underlying conviction, but whether the person should be sentenced to death. Because even a conviction does not mean, in any sense, that an individual should necessarily be sentenced to death. And we have, of course, a system in, I think, most, if not all, jurisdictions of, I think it's everywhere, of aggravators and mitigators that are considered, and other factors that the jury considers in determining if the person should get death or not. So it's critical to understand the full role of and the importance of a lawyer in those representations as they go forward.
One of our grads who was a long-term criminal defense attorney and then later became a judge was giving a talk to some of our students once, and he said, when he has been asked by people, how can you be a person who represents these folks, who are criminals, that his response at some point became, I represent the Constitution of the United States. And I just thought that was such a powerful way to think about the important role that lawyers play within our criminal justice system on both sides, whether you're a prosecutor or whether you're a criminal defense attorney. That ultimately what we're trying to do is make sure that the constitutional guarantees are played out in all of these different proceedings that take place.
Kim, you are absolutely right. And it is yet another reason why I believe that engagement in the organized bar And I would say in this instance, particularly in the American Bar Association, is so critically important for lawyers who may be in commercial litigators or transactional lawyers who want to do this type or other types of pro bono work, but also for prosecutors and defense counsel, either in the private area or as public defenders, who we consider such valuable members of the American Bar Association, because the ABA affords a place where people can go and talk about critical issues, where they can network and understand how they can be better at their jobs. And sometimes it is the case that they also, at an ABA table, are afforded an opportunity to hear from someone of totally different views. And they may not walk away from that table agreeing with that person of totally different views. But what's important is that they've had the dialogue that lawyers are so good at having and understanding views that are different from maybe those that an individual may hold. And it is because of that that we believe that the resources that we afford and the positions we take on assuring that representation in the capital area is given to each and every person. It's one of the most, I'd suggest to you, important work of the American Bar Association, because it assures competency and ethics and so much more when it comes to lawyers who do that work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's incredibly admirable work. And I'm so glad that the ABA is doing it. I want to talk a little bit more about pro bono work. So one of the things that we hear all the time, most often from people who are not lawyers, is, oh, there are too many lawyers in the world, right? We don't need all these lawyers. We certainly don't need all these lawyers in the United States. And yet, one of the things that we see, not just in the criminal justice world, but in lots of different types of law, is a number of people who are not able to access legal services, either because they need them for free, or because they live in a rural area, or because they don't qualify for free legal services, but they don't make enough money to pay for the sort of normal rate that an attorney would charge. Could we talk a little bit about how do we think about creating a world in which hopefully everybody who needs access to an attorney, whether it's because they are going to traffic court or because they are getting a divorce, or because they're an entrepreneur who wants to start a new business, that people can get access to lawyers, to people who have expertise to help them as law becomes relevant in their lives.
Well, it's beyond debate, Kim, that we have not fulfilled the promise of access to justice for everyone in our country, and particularly for those who are poor and near poor, and even those of moderate means.
Mm-hmm.
The data is now significantly available to show on so many levels that, in fact, the legal needs of the poor and near poor are going unmet in significant ways. 85% or more of the legal needs of the public remain unmet in terms of those who are below poverty guidelines, 125% of poverty guidelines in this country. And yet that only tells a part of the story, because there are so many more who, even of moderate means, can't access legal services as they need to. And we also know from the work that's been done by allies who work with us on these issues that, in fact, many people don't even recognize the problems and challenges they face in life are those that have a legal solution, if you will. They don't understand that necessarily if they go to court as the place for that solution, they will find assistance that they need. So we have a lot of educating to do in that regard. We have a lot to do in terms of outreach to the public to help them understand the role of lawyers and others who can assist, whether with legal information or legal services. And what we know is that people who can access those services, whether in the immigration arena, in the domestic violence arena, in veterans benefits, or on so many other fronts, when they have the assistance of lawyers and others working with lawyers, they fare better. And the data that has come forth through studies tells us that we have so much more work to do, despite the significant pro bono that's lent to the public, despite the extraordinary work of legal services corporation funded organizations across this country and other legal aid organizations that lend their time and talents. And so, what it calls upon us to do, I believe, as a profession, is to consistently and persistently think about how we can improve access to justice. If you look at the preamble to the rules that govern lawyers' conduct, the model rules of professional conduct, the ABA model rules of professional conduct, that preamble talks about lawyers being public citizens and the obligations they have to work to improve not only the delivery of legal services to their clients, but also to work to improve the administration of justice, to work hand in hand with judges to assure greater access to the courts, to work to improve the way in which legal services are delivered. And what that tells you is that I believe each and every one of us who serve and have the privilege of serving as a lawyer have an important role to play, whether that is educating the public about the services and legal information that is out there and available through kiosk at public libraries in some cities, through self-help desk at courthouses and other means, or whether it's actually rendering services to some. For instance, that rendition of services can be in the form of the kind of things we're seeing right now in this moment of the year where we're celebrating the 19th Amendment centennial. The centennial is the 100th anniversary of women's right to vote. That's what the 19th Amendment did. It guaranteed and protects the right of women to vote. And what we're seeing lawyers do is step up to not only help with registration of voters, to make sure that people understand what shouldn't be obstacles to their voting, which is, of course, voting being the most fundamental role that a citizen in this country can play in our democracy. But other lawyers are stepping up to assist with polling places, being polling officials or election officials. They are stepping up to help registration of young people in accordance with policies, some of which were recently passed by the American Bar Association House of Delegates, our policymaking body, to afford the right to urge states to allow pre-registration of voters at the age of 16 to 18, and to afford that they will be automatically enrolled upon reaching the legal age to vote, and to make sure that there's robust civics education and appropriate funds for civics education about the right and the importance of voting, and so much more. And our work on the policy front at the American Bar Association, as adopted by the House of Delegates, to urge states and legislatures and the government to remove barriers to Native American and Alaskan Natives that they face when trying to register to vote, and to ensure protection of Native American voting rights, and to, for instance, write a book that just was released called America Votes, which lays out the challenges to modern election law and voting rights, which was written by two ABA active leaders, Ben Griffith and Jack Young, to talk about how people can engage and make sure, again, that this fundamental right of our country is afforded to all and can be exercised by all.
Wonderful. I know that the theme for Law Day this year, which will be May 1st, 2020, is Your Vote, Your Voice, Our Democracy, the 19th Amendment at 100. And certainly what you were just talking about is so relevant to thinking about, how do we protect our democracy and how do we make sure that the widest range of voices are allowed to participate in our democracy as they should. But, that theme, I think, sort of suggests at least two different trains of thought for me. One is this train of thought, which is about women in the law, women and the law, and that we are in this time where women have been about 50% of law students for quite some time now. And yet we're still pushing to see women in some of the, upper echelons of corporate law or in law firms. We're still pushing to have policies that are friendly to people who are caregivers, whether they are male or female. We're living through this era of Me Too and Time's Up, which obviously has significant impacts on how we think about women and their progress in the law. But the other piece of that theme is, for me at least, about how do we protect the rule of law, which I think is something that we've been talking about a lot over the last few years in the United States. There are definitely concerns about sort of where we sit and sort of where our politics have been moving. And so there's, two very big themes there. And I've obviously already taken up a lot of your time today, but I'd love to hear you talk about either, one or both of those things. One, sort of where we are as women within the legal profession. And then two, what role does and should the ABA play in ensuring that this country protects the rule of law?
Sure, I'll be happy to speak to both of them. First of all, with regard to women, we've made tremendous progress, but there's so much more to do.
Hmm.
And we are aggressively and energetically looking at that, understanding with hope because of progress made on the shoulders of so many women who have come before us. And, in my case, the women, for instance, who served as ABA president, who led so much and who have worked in coordination with so many of our male colleagues to not only address the challenges of women through the programming we have, for instance, the recent report on Walk Out the Door, which addresses and gives concrete recommendations and action steps with regard to how firms can not only address the challenges faced by women in the peaks of their careers when they are leaving in significant numbers from the legal practice and private law firms, but also to understand specific actions that they can take to make retention of those women an affirmative policy statement of their firms by their actions and their deeds. And the work that we do to address the significant challenges and barriers faced by women of color, the double bind, if you will, of the burdens that they face in their careers throughout their careers, and how we are in each instance that we have somebody who has felt turned away, we are losing talent that is not only critical to the future of our legal profession, but more importantly, is critical to the public, which we've taken an oath to serve. I can tell you right now that within the American Bar Association, the presence, the commitment, most importantly, the contribution of women across all of our sections, divisions, and forums and standing committees and commissions is shining bright. You may not know that right now, 4 out of 6 officers of the association are women, and 2 of those are women of color. And that has been a consistent presence these last many years. It's one I am, and I know the other officers of the ABA, and I would suggest to you the entire leadership of the ABA is very proud of. And we know that that presence makes our voice stronger. That presence makes our voice have even more capacity, and that presence of women and individuals of color, and frankly, everyone who comes to our ranks, whether our LGBTQ colleagues or our colleagues with different abilities, our colleagues from various practice settings, makes the voice of the ABA one that can speak out with authority on issues where we can have impact. And certainly one of those issues is with regard to the rule of law, both through our voice as well as our demonstrated acts. And I think sometimes lawyers don't necessarily realize that what they do on the work in the immigration arena, what they do to make sure that they are staving off for as many individuals homelessness and poverty, what they do in order to assure that victims of domestic and sexual abuse have counsel and information they need, what they do in order to assure that those among our ranks who have to come into the civil or criminal justice arena have counsel and information that they need is all part of the framework that we provide on the rule of law. And we have spoken specifically when we know that our voice will make a difference, and we'll continue to do that. Most importantly, on issues of judicial independence, on issues of access to justice, and on issues of rule of law, not only domestically, but also across the globe, where the ABA does some of its most extraordinary work in countries far and near where democracy is at risk or democracy is being born.
Wonderful. Well, Judy, thank you so much for your time. This has been a really extraordinary conversation, and I want to thank you not only for your time that you spent with me today, but for the amount of time that you are spending with the American Bar Association and the work that you are doing there, which obviously is having a very wide-ranging impact on the profession and on our country. So thank you so much for all that you do. And in the meantime, please continue to do the tremendous work that you've been doing.
Well, thank you so much, Kim. It's been a pleasure to talk with you this morning. And I just urge others who want to make a difference, whether in some small or other way. And I can tell you that it's an honor to have this year of service. But I just urge them to join the ABA and to join us, whether law students or lawyers in practice or in government service, lawyers in the military, and other affiliated professionals who care about the issues we care about. We need you within our ranks, and we know that we benefit from your participation. And to know that your law school, Rutgers, is doing so much to promote all of the work that needs to be done on behalf of the public is truly inspiring for me and will be for the months to come. And I look forward to seeing you later this spring.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
The Power of Attorney is produced by Rutgers Law School. With 2 locations, minutes from Philadelphia and New York City, Rutgers Law offers the prestige and reputation of a large, nationally known university with a personal small campus experience. Learn more by visiting law.rutgers.edu.